I kind of knew one pace. That pace was full throttle, and I would kind of keep going until I couldn't anymore, and then I would crash out at unpredictable times. By my 40s, I got to a point where I was sort of tired of the cycle of being superhuman and then crashing. I started to think about what would it be like if I was sort of pacing myself more proactively, setting a pace that I could sustain from the beginning instead of completely ignoring all my limits and then reaping the bad physical and mental consequences of that. When we're not pushing ourselves to the wall all the time, we actually often do achieve more and max out our potential more in the long term.
You don't manage your time until you know what you're managing your time for. So until you're clear what you're trying to achieve and why it matters to you, it's really difficult to put in anything else.
It takes courage to figure out, first of all, what your own ideal pace is, and then to carry that out in the face of maybe some objections, maybe you're getting ostracized by certain people. Who do you think you are to be so special, to do something different than what everybody else is doing?
So how do I talk to people about this? Let's say that I've gotten smart about my own pacing. How do I have that conversation with a manager, particularly a manager is a very different pace?
Managers have much more influence than they may realize. I mean, I think first I would tell them that
there is no growth in comfort and no comfort in growth. Yet the big leaps are how careers are made and how businesses excel. So how do you master not knowing at all or feeling like an imposter? How do you have the conversations that lead to trust and, of course, excellence? How do you take charge of the things that you can control? How do you thrive outside your comfort zone? That's what this podcast is about. I'm your host, Wanda Wallace, and it's time to get out of your comfort zone.
Welcome to the conversation. So today we're going to talk about pacing, all right? And there is no question that the pace of absolutely everything, personally and professionally, feels a tad bit out of control for most of the people that I talk to. The question for today is, how do you know when enough is enough? And then how do you act on that without damaging your reputation in ways that are irreparable? More importantly, what are we going to learn from athletes who do have to pace themselves between competition? Well, that's the topic for today. And my guest is Elizabeth Svoboda. The book that we are talking about is The Art of Pacing. Well, let me tell you about Elizabeth. She's been fascinated with human behavior and what is driving human behavior since she was little. And I can share that with you, Elizabeth. Me too, since I was in my teens. That has been part of my mission. She graduated of Yale. She began her career at Discover Magazine, and then went on to a bunch of publications like New York Times, Psychology Today, Washington Post, and more. All right, and she's focused on resilience and moral motivation in many of her writings. She has an earlier book, kind of targeted for younger readers, called What Makes a Hero: The Surprising Science of Selflessness. And then today we're talking about the adult working version called The Art of Pacing. Slightly different topic, but anyway. Elizabeth, welcome to the conversation.
Thank you so much, Wanda. It's great to be here.
It's great to have you with us. There is no doubt everybody listening to this wants to know how to do pacing and not have that drive you bananas and killing your reputation. And I just feel like it's so much easier to say and so much difficult to do. But before I go there, why? Why does this topic matter to you? You've been fascinated with human behavior and moral courage for years. So why this particular book?
Yeah, I mean, as I got further into it, I started to see the ways that pacing and morality are connected. But I think the initial way that I got into this topic was I started to see and recognize more the ways that I had been sort of failing at pacing actually throughout my life. And that started pretty early, I would say in my teens. I grew up in a school system and in like a prevailing culture where if your teachers and your mentors thought that you had potential, it was kind of like, well, of course, you are going to max out that potential to the best of your ability. You are going to pile activities and honors onto your plate like you're an all-you-can-eat buffet. And looking back, I kind of wish I had so many great mentors and people that encouraged me, but I wish I had had someone who kind of advised me to pull back a little bit more, think about like, why am I taking on these things that I'm taking on? Or is it just more about racking up the honors, racking up the accolades, because what happened with me is I kind of took that lack of pacing into adulthood with me. Just, I kind of knew one pace. That pace was full throttle, and I would kind of keep going until I couldn't anymore. And then I would crash out at unpredictable times. And but by my 40s, I got to a point where I was sort of tired of the cycle of being superhuman and then crashing. And I started to think about what would it be like if I was sort of pacing myself more proactively, setting a pace that I could sustain from the beginning instead of completely ignoring all my limits and then reaping the bad physical and mental consequences of that.
It's interesting. I mean, you're right. I think particularly, well, certainly in the US, I think it's true outside the US as well, particularly Western culture, where we want our kids to compete to go to the best secondary schools, the best universities, the best advanced degrees, whatever. And we know as parents that the criteria for getting there are incredibly high and going by the minute. And if
Hmm.
everybody else is doing one bit more, then we push our kids to do one bit more, and the schools will as well. So we
Yeah.
really do set up, add, without pausing to say, what is it worth? And I know we're going to come to athletes. Go ahead.
No, that's exactly right. And I mean, what the research shows, though, is that when we're not pushing ourselves to the wall all the time, we actually often do achieve more and max out our potential more in the long term. That's why I mean, I became so interested in how these athletes at the top of their game were pacing themselves, and they were becoming so adept at managing their energy in ways that most of us don't learn to do, like giving themselves, yes, they're working hard, but there's so much padding around that. They're giving themselves permission to take longer breaks than we in the non-athletic world typically allow ourselves to do. And just having sort of these periods of engagement and then withdrawal to the point that you can actually renew your reserves, that is what's going to sustain you over the course of your career, rather than going too hard and crashing out. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah. I do know from working with some sports psychologists that they say that anybody who's going to compete at an Olympic class level has to be really clear why they're doing the competition. And it cannot be because mom said they should, or dad said they should, or the school said they should, or the university application will look better, or any other reason. It said you will not sustain the endurance unless you have your own personal reason for doing it.
Yes.
So, and I just think we forget that. Why does this matter to me? Why do I care what it is that I'm trying to achieve? Not just the title, by the way, but really learn and achieve. We lose track of that, and I think we set ourselves up for overdoing.
Right. And I think when we're raised in this way that, like me, I was such a pleaser when I was a kid. I wanted to meet every expectation that somebody else had for me. And I think what happens is you start to lose track of the line between what you want for yourself and what other people want for you. And when you get that kind of line blurring, I think that is dangerous territory. That's when you start to see people maybe who are young prodigies sort of crashing out because, yeah, like you said, the motivation has to come from within, which is one reason as a parent myself, I really try to hold myself back from imposing my own expectations on my kids, maybe because I've been so immersed in this topic. I know what happens when you pile all that on the head of a young person.
Yeah, it's sitting there as a parent is a hard call to make. And this is why I think you get to moral courage. Everybody else is doing it. You don't want your kid to fall behind. At the same time, you don't want to burn them out. You want them to do things they enjoy. I mean, there's a lot of decisions that are really tough to do. All right, so let's get out of the parenting world. I hope I haven't totally screwed up in my life, but I'm not here to give parenting advice. So I want to talk about corporate life and your career and implications for career. I suspect, though, Elizabeth, before we dive too much further, we need to get a sense of what do you mean by pacing?
Yeah, that's such a good point. I guess if I had to define it, I would say if you're pacing yourself, you're being very deliberate about how you manage your energy on different time scales. Like, how do you pace yourself over the course of a day, a week, or a month, and actually thinking about your life in sort of these longer arcs too, like not just what are the urgent things that I have to do all today, but as I look toward my professional growth, what do I want to accomplish this year and how am I going to build in the engagement and the rest so that I can get there? Because when you leave all of that to the last minute, usually those big picture things are the things that end up not getting done. I mean, maybe you're putting out all the fires, you're doing all these things that you absolutely have to do, but it's losing sight of the big picture. So I guess pacing yourself on a daily basis facilitates giving yourself the thinking time, the consideration time that you need to do this longer range planning and longer range pacing.
Okay, so you're not talking about quiet quitting, which a lot of people might wish you were talking about, just for the record. And you're also not saying, okay, my job ends at 5 o'clock. I'm going home at 5. That's the end of the day. You're talking about having a goal you want to achieve. And again, not just a title goal, but something you are personally trying to achieve that matters to you, that you're invested in, and that
Right.
you set a pace you can sustain for the long run. So that means that
Yes.
we put peaks of time where you're pushing, but there have to be peaks other times where you pull back and rest and restore.
Exactly. That's exactly right. And I think that motivation is really at the heart of that. Like your goal has to matter to you. Otherwise, the best pacing tactics on a granular level, like in terms of managing your energy from hour to hour and things like that, those are not actually going to serve you all that well until you have a clear idea of what your, I'll say finish line to extend the athletic metaphor. What is your finish line and why? Where did that finish line come from? Is that one that you picked yourself, or is that something that you sort of absorbed through osmosis or somebody else imposed on you?
Yeah, yeah. Finish line is an interesting metaphor too for a career because it's not clear what that means or what the finish line of a goal is, even for that matter. But I'm with you on the athletic analogy. All right, so you're reminding me of Richard Marquardt. Marquardt. Richard, excuse me, not Richard Marquardt, Richard Metcalf. I get those those names mixed up all the time. Sorry, Richard. And shout out to Richard Metcalf, Making Time for Strategy, 10X Reckoning. I really think that Richard's core idea is you don't manage your time until you know what you're managing your time for. So
Yes.
until you're clear what you're trying to achieve and why it matters to you, it's really difficult to put in anything else, so priority list, delegation list, or pacing. And you're nodding your head, so you agree.
Yes, and I think of Simon Sinek too. You may be familiar with his work. He talks about start with why. And in my investigations of pacing and just my experiences, my own experiments with pacing, that is absolutely true. Like when you have that why, it's like the thing that sets the wheel in motion as far as pacing. It's the thing that ensures that as you're pacing yourself day to day, you feel a little bit more like you're going downhill, like you're moving with your own energy instead of against it. And it's just going to make everything else feel a whole lot easier. I mean, a lot of us in some corporate environments where there's not a match, where we don't have a why, we know that feeling of sort of wading through muck on a daily basis, like counting down the hours, counting down the minutes until we get to go home for the day.
Yeah, yeah, that is not a good way to build a reputation or a career or necessarily even a life in my sense. Okay, I want to pull back from those though and talk for a minute about what you learned from athletes. So we've mentioned this already, that athletes have to pace themselves between competition, but you did a deep dive into athletes who are at a high level of competition. Tell us what you learned from them.
I did. And this was sort of one of the things that drew me into the topic too, just as I was having these conversations with athletes and coaches, I really got a sense of they are so sophisticated and deliberate of managing their energy over the course of a training day, a week, or an entire season. And that's because if they didn't, they know that they wouldn't really stay at the top of their game very long at all. And, they're so respectful of their own limits in a way that many of us haven't learned to be. And I think I didn't even think about trying to do until a little bit later in my career, 30s and 40s. And there was one athlete who I got to really do a deep dive with because I spent some time just observing her training. Her name is Ajay Wilson. She is a multi-time Olympian. She is a middle distance runner who has been a world champion. So really, you can see that she's been at the top of her game. But as I observed her training, it's so interesting. She really, when she's preparing for a big race or a big meet, she's probably training for about 2.5 hours a day. And I think we sort of envision these Olympic athletes, oh, they're, working themselves to the bone from sun up to sundown or whatever the case may be. But really, in most cases, that couldn't be further from the truth, because like Ajay told me, that is what leads you to these overuse injuries. That is what saps all your energy and your motivation before you get to these big meets. And so, okay, Ajay was doing these single, pretty intense practice blocks, but during those, she was taking what we call micro breaks, or what the researchers call micro breaks. And so she was giving herself the time between these really intense bouts of running and, just doing drills and things like that to collect herself, to decide, okay, what am I ready for next? What do I have the capacity to do here? How full is my energy tank, and how is that going to direct the way I approach the rest of this practice? So even within these stretches of really intense effort, you are negotiating, you are checking in with yourself. And then what probably surprises people the most is at the end of the day, Ajay, I kind of asked her, well, what do you do after your practice is done for the day, or after you've eaten lunch? Like, do you have hobbies? Are you going out with friends? Like, what are you doing? And she kind of laughed and she's like, honestly, I am doing a lot of sleeping. Like, I am crashing out. I am absolutely crashing out and giving myself the time that I need to recover from this really intense effort that I am putting in. And I might be napping for 2 hours. I might be napping for 2.5 hours. I just give my body, I give my mind the time that they need. And especially if you are somebody who wants to sustain unusual levels of effort over the long haul, this is how they do it in athletics. And I think we can do a version of this too. Like, we all probably have these moments where we really do have to put in a lot of time and effort. Maybe we're preparing for a big presentation, or just making a pitch to somebody that we really want to sell our idea to, whatever the case might be. And if you have been working yourself that hard for 2 days, 3 days, 4 days on end or longer, what most of us don't do is we don't give ourselves the recovery time to compensate for that effort. And so I think if we did that, if we allowed ourselves to recover without pushing ourselves to the brink of burnout, we would be a lot better off, and we would not have these crashes that really can require days, weeks, or even months to recover from.
Yeah, and you certainly don't want to be spending your vacation time recovering from what you've done to yourself to get to the vacation. That doesn't seem to me as the plan that all of us are dreaming about. So let me
Exactly.
see if I can recap this. We have this notion that I have a thing I want to accomplish. I have a personal reason for why that accomplishment matters to me.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not driven by society's expectations or people around me's expectations. It's my own personal mission. I hope it's more than a title, but I suppose for some people the title could be the personal mission. And then we have pacing. We have micro pacing in the day with bursts of energy during the day. How do I pace that kind of intensity? But I also have pacing day in and day out to make sure that I can sustain the performance I was doing on day 1 and day 50, 500, whatever it is. So it's two kinds of pacing you want to talk about.
Right. That's exactly right. It's sort of the 30,000 view look at things, which we allow ourselves by giving ourselves time during the day to really consider what do we want the larger arc, not just of our careers, but of our lives to look like.
Fair enough. Okay, so I want to turn, it's like we know two of the things that we have to do to pace ourselves is to eat well, to move well, and sleep well. We all cut corners on all three of us, some of them more one than the other, but we know those three are the cornerstone of being able to sustain performance. And
Mm-hmm.
yes, your body will get used to sleeping on 4 and 5 hours. I promise you, you are not at your peak performance and you can't sustain it for a long time, like years, and be at peak performance either if you're not
Right.
sleeping a little bit more.
Mm-hmm.
Call me if you want to debate that challenge, but we can debate it. Okay, now the question I want to say is how do we come to recognize what is our natural pace? All right, so I could say I wake up in the morning. I am not at my best when I first wake up. I need an hour to get my brain really in gear before I'm ready to go full pace.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Some people are the polar opposite. I'm also not a late night owl. So I've got a defined period in the middle of the day or in the morning to the early afternoon where I can crank it out. But I move outside those, I got to do different kinds of tasks. I can't do the tasks that require the deep energy or deep thinking. How do you encourage people to find their own pace, their own rhythm?
Yeah, that is so important. And what I like to stress is that right pace, or I love what the slow movement pioneer Carl Honore, he calls it the tempo giusto, which in Italian means like the right pace or the right tempo for you and for the moment. And it could be that maybe you have a coworker who really thrives on a 60 or 70-hour a week schedule and that they are getting more energized throwing themselves into actually absolutely everything, and they don't seem to need as long periods of downtime as you do. But I think self-honesty is really really key, and I think you're getting at that too. Like for me, I know that I cannot sustain a 60 or 70-hour week pace for more than a week at a time before I start showing signs that I'm going to crash out really soon. And just like you, when I'm waking up, I need to take that hour for my brain to fully wake up. I need that boost from caffeine. I need to do these things or I'm not going to be at my best. And so part of that is just doing some inquiry with yourself. And as you manage your most important work, thinking to yourself, okay, what realistically have been the times of day that I just am really most on the ball and I am most equipped to tackle these things that are most important to me. And so for me, that's usually kind of mid-morning, say 10 to 10:30 until whenever I break for lunch, usually around 12:30 or something like that. And when I am doing writing work, which for me is my most intense work, I am so much more likely to blow past my goals if I'm working during those peak periods than if I try to do the exact same amount of work after lunch. That is not going to work at all. And for somebody else, that might be their right pace. They might be able to chew through something right after scarfing down a Reuben sandwich or whatever. But it's just not something that I can do. And I have figured out through trial and error that that doesn't work for me. And I think one of the biggest mistakes that we make is when people around us are keeping a particular pace, that we sort of absorb that and assume without questioning that that is the pace that we ourselves should be taking on. But when we make that assumption, I think it's very self-sabotaging a lot of the time.
Right. I find it, yeah, I think I keep a long working day, and anybody who looks at my schedule knows that that's the case, but I am comfortable with the hours. What I'm not comfortable with is kinds of work at particular moments in the day. So if you were to ask me to give a keynote talk, for example, or to do a very difficult coaching session where there was a tricky message to navigate, you
Mm-hmm.
would not want me doing that at 4 o'clock. Now, that doesn't mean it doesn't happen, but then I have to get myself ready for that pacing. So it's just knowing my own system and working around what's going to give me my best output for the kind of work I'm trying to do at that moment in time. So, Teresa Welburn also has some wonderful research about energy levels. And she talks about, some people have just this, they need this high volume of energy, high volume of activity feels like they're on caffeine overload every single minute of every day. And that level
Oh,
of
yeah.
energy is what they love.
Yep.
But some people don't thrive in that level of energy. They need but a lower level of energy gives them their best work. It strikes me that that's another piece of what you want to look at when you think about what's the pace for me that is going to give me my best output.
That is exactly right. And I actually learned a lot that there are some people that just have lower energy levels like on a daily basis than most of us do. Maybe they're dealing with chronic illness or just for whatever reason, there are things going on in their lives that they know that their bank of energy is limited and they have to take really proactive measures to manage that so that they can pace themselves through the day. And it's called activity pacing in the chronic illness community. But I really think all of us should be doing a form of that, just kind of doing these self-assessments of what do I realistically get done over the course of the day that leaves me in a place where I still have enough energy to approach the next day enthusiastically and the next and the next. And I mean, maybe it sounds so simple, but the fact is that in this culture, in this particular time, most of us just do not learn those skills. We are not encouraged to go through this trial and error process ourselves and learn what our natural energetic limits, our natural capacities. I mean, you could call them strengths, weaknesses, whatever it is, but just getting familiar with those. And athletes are so good at that because if they're not, they just crash out in a very physical, a very obvious way. Whereas for those of us who are not athletes, I think we can kind of keep limping along and telling ourselves, sort of being in the self-delusion that everything is okay, I'm great, I'm making it through the day, when in reality we have nowhere near the level of enthusiasm that we started our careers with, and we just feel privately like we're spinning our wheels.
Right. Or we make mistakes and have to go back and fix it. Or we write that email and go, oh, it wasn't really what I wanted to say or how I wanted to say or as clear as it could have been. We end up redoing work in one way or another. I think that's the measure that we can get in the corporate world of our work. Okay, so how do I talk to people about this? Let's say that I've gotten smart about my own pacing. I understand what level of energy I need to sustain day in and day out. I know, you know, I know what it takes for me to be at my best performance every day for the next many, many decades. How do I have that conversation with a manager, particularly a manager who has a very different pace?
Right. I mean, I think first I would tell them that managers have much more influence than they may realize over how well their team is functioning as a unit, and that starts with being aware and helping the people within the team to find the right pace and also to support one another when different members of the team might be feeling overwhelmed. Like, I think what managers find is that when they model a group norm of, okay, like if you're feeling overwhelmed, please check in with us. The rest of us are going to do the best that we can to support you. And then when you as a team member have a chance to support someone else, when they're having a challenge, you are going to gladly pitch in and provide that because you have received that. So there's within the best functioning teams, people are receiving that support, people are providing that support, and you are retaining those employees are happy, those employees are giving their best for you. And so even if you're a manager that's really focused most on productivity, like results, quantifying how much is my team doing, setting that smart pace within your team and facilitating that makes the most sense in the long run.
Okay. I get philosophically why you would say that. So I get that if the people on the team are willing to support each other and help each other, it feels better. We have a good camaraderie. We can pick up the slack in one place or another. One thing more difficult, one person can handle more and more less. All right. In principle, I get you. As a manager, how do I deal with my worry that I have a freeloader problem, meaning somebody on the team who's unwilling to do their fair share?
Yeah.
because that's everybody's anxiety. And if I think that they're doing their fair share, but somebody else on the team doesn't think that, they start resenting being asked to always help. What's your answer to those managers?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I would have an honest conversation with the person that they perceive to be the freeloader, because smart pacing isn't about letting people coast. In fact, if somebody is coasting, if somebody is not doing their fair share, it interferes with everybody else's pacing because, like you said, they have to pick up the slack. So you do, yeah, you have that honest conversation and just, I think being very clear about, okay, we need to finish this project by the end of the week, just like spelling out that expectation and also leaving room for that person, just being very clear, like, I understand and I support you're needing to take breaks on the way to this, but at the end of the day, we got to get this shipped or we got to get this done. And so I think you can deliver both messages. And I think it's also, not only should you do it, it's essential to the rest of the team being able to pace themselves effectively.
I guess it's fair that if you're having a pacing conversation, an effective pacing conversation with everybody reporting to you, you will know if someone is feeling overloaded, unfairly treated, or unfairly asked to carry too much. And you'll know if somebody is struggling or not struggling or has slack time or whatever. So I think if you're consistently doing the pacing conversation with everyone, you've got a better leg to stand on in the difficult conversations.
Yes.
Then there's this problem. Everybody I'm talking to at every level, in every organization, on every continent, has more to do than their team can conceivably do. And that goes from the bottom of the organization all the way to the top of the organization. What we're trying to accomplish just feels outsized for the people we have. Hard to do pacing in that environment. So what's your response there?
Yeah, I mean, that is really a problem that starts at the top, and it really feeds into this idea that, yeah, we're supposed to go at breakneck speed all the time. We're supposed to go beyond our human capabilities. And some companies, some firms really exemplify that or trying to do that. But what I would ask them is, what is your retention rate of your employees over time? Are you actually, like, when you look on a years long time scale, are you actually hitting the goals that you want to hit, or are you wasting a bunch of time having to retrain new people and build things a little bit from scratch again because you are burning people out? Because those limits, I mean, to a certain extent or for certain periods of time, we can pretend that those limits aren't there, but sooner or later and unpredictably, they are going to rear their head. Yeah.
They come in. Yeah. Yeah. I see that. I think if every manager had, you can't always get access to this, but if you had the real cost of losing an employee, so the recruiting cost to bring them back in, the time lost for the recruiters, your team to interview, you to interview, the whole vetting process, the training process, the getting them up to speed. If you had a number to quantify that, you'd get smarter about how you manage those resources. You probably also get smarter at how you move some of them on quickly, because if you're going to incur that cost, I'd rather incur it sooner rather than later. So it's just, I think if we could approximate those numbers, we'd start paying attention more to the burnout and the overuse.
That is such a good idea. And I hope that teams do follow that lead of, okay, what is the real cost? Because I think that when it becomes routine, like when you have this revolving door of employees burning out and leaving, and just like, okay, that this is the cost of doing business, but you're not actually tallying up that cost.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's a difficult thing to do because so many of those costs are centralized and it's hard to know what proportion belongs to me in any realistic way. But it is an interesting challenge to think about what's the cost of pushing your people further than they can sustain over the long run. All right. Do you have any last strategies you recommend for people in getting the pacing right?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'd love to go back to what we talked about earlier, the courage it takes to set your own right pace. As you said, Wanda, I've looked into heroism and altruism. I've also done deep dives into that. And one thing I found is that when people go against the social grain, which many heroes do, maybe down the line they're celebrated, but at first, a lot of people are actually looking at them as deviant. Like they're looking at them as, who do you think you are to be so special, to do something different than what everybody else is doing? And I think that especially when you're in a corporate environment where the baseline expectation is just going above and beyond at all times, it takes courage to figure out, first of all, what your own ideal pace is, what your limitations are, what pace you can actually sustain over the weeks, months, and years, and then to carry that out in the face of, maybe some objections. Maybe you're getting ostracized by certain people who, maybe deep down they wish they could be doing the same thing, but they don't feel like they can. And yeah, I'm not going to lie to people, that backlash will arise. And I would also have them think about, if that backlash is so significant that this threatens their job, is this really a viable place for them to be in the long term anyway? Because
Fair enough. Fair enough. I would just leave people with the notion that what we really want as leaders and managers in organizations are people that are committed, engaged, excited, innovative, part of the team, contributing. That's what we really want. And to do that, I can only work at a certain pace. And if I don't monitor that myself, then I compromise the thing that the manager really ultimately seriously wants. So that doesn't mean slow it down to a screeching halt, but it means think about what this is for the long run journey, not just the day to day. I get frustrated with people who think next week it'll be better, next month it'll be better, next vacation it'll be better, next whatever, and they're not really recognizing that this is not sustainable. So important conversations in organizations, I think, very important.
Absolutely.
All right, my guest today, Elizabeth Svoboda. The book is called The Art of Pacing. And Elizabeth, if somebody wanted to find you, where's the best place to reach out?
Well, you can go to my website, which is elizabethsvoboda.com. I am also on Instagram a lot these days. My username is Svobodster, which is S, V as in Victor, O, BODSTER. So I'd love to chat with you over there. I love to have dialogue with people who are thinking about pacing or thinking about how to approach that in their workplaces. And then you can find my book, The Art of Pacing. Any online bookseller, just type in The Art of Pacing and it should pop up.
Wonderful. I love it. Thank you, Elizabeth. Thanks for the comments. Thanks for the work. And just send us a comment. We'd love to hear from you, outofthecomfortzone.com. And otherwise, we'll see you next week for another episode in Getting Out of Your Comfort Zone.